Could Wizards of the Coast get past the reserve list and reprint something like the dual lands in Brothers of War? The dual lands themselves? Short answer, no. Something better than the dual lands? Long answer, maybe. Let's check it out. Into my friendly local game store about a week or two before Dominaria United was coming out, and we were discussing, besides the Lost Legends, what could be in that set. And I guess because I've been watching a bunch of different videos about reserve list stuff and thinking about, you know, how they can get to the edge of their promise with the reserve list, what kind of cards could they print? And now the two cards that came to mind for me were the Jeweled Lotus from Commander Legends and the Biblioplex from Strixhaven. Both of those cards have sort of, you know, driven to the edge, the border of the promise of the reserve list. The Jeweled Lotus is situational for Commander and can only be used to cast your Commander, but in every other way, it's functionally identical to the original Black Lotus, which is on the reserve list. The Biblioplex is almost identical to the Library of Alexandria, but the wording makes it situational as well, and it's not functionally identical, and also doesn't have the same name. So if there are other cards that interacted with the Library of Alexandria, they don't necessarily interact with the Biblioplex, so maybe it's not as powerful as the Library of Alexandria. But from the way that the text is worded, I could see it maybe at some point being more powerful than the Library of Alexandria. However, I'm not an expert in these things, and feel free in the comments to tell me why I'm absolutely wrong about that. But I, for now, see the Biblioplex as actually superior to the Library of Alexandria. So, when I had that in mind, when I was talking to the store owner, I thought about, well, we're going back to Dominaria. We're going back to the 90s in a very real sense because Lost Legends are in here. So either in Dominaria United or the upcoming Brothers War, or even later sets next year, which all kind of have Dominaria connections to them, what could they print that would really draw people in, that would be a game changer? And I was thinking, well, you know, the finance side of Magic the Gathering always talks about the dual lands being the gateway into investing in Magic. And of course, the players, they absolutely need dual lands. For most of their decks, whether it's Standard, Modern, or Commander, casual or competitive, dual lands are very important, but they've never reprinted them. But can they? Well, taking the idea of the Jeweled Lotus and the Biblioplex, when I was speaking with the store owner, I thought to myself, what would be the dual land equivalent of those cards? And went through a bunch of different scenarios and eventually landed on this idea of a land that comes into play, doesn't come into play tapped, because I know how much that bothers people, and it originally I thought it either taps for a gray land or taps for a land in your commander's color, but why bother with the gray land? Maybe that functionally gives it, you know, some other ability that in which you want something that only taps for gray and not a color, so you want a colorless mana. So yes, I guess you would keep that functionality. Taps for a gray or taps for a color in your commander's color. Well, if your commander has more than one color, that makes it at least as good as a dual land, if not better, if your commander has, say, 3 colors. And the land itself, to make it as good as a dual land, has to have the wording that, you know, it's either a mountain, a plains, a swamp, a forest, or an island, because you need that so that fetch lands work with them, which is, you know, kind of why dual lands are so important, is because fetch lands are so important and the two interact together. So today I was finishing up my thoughts on this idea, and what would this land be? I thought maybe it would be the realm of lotuses. And just imagine a painting of an island that has a mountain. At the base of the mountain is some forest, and at the edge of the forest is plains and swamp that intersect, and all of these things intersect, and there's a bunch of lotuses. In the background, tiny little lotuses, and maybe one little black lotus in there. And so this land would then be a plains, island, mountain, swamp, forest. And it would be the realm of lotuses. And it would tap for a colorless mana, or one color that your commander is in. And it essentially would be functionally identical, if not better, than a dual land, because it doesn't come into play tapped, and it references those specific lands so it can be fetched. Now, will this happen? I'm almost certain at some point in the future, some land like this is going to show up. Will people identify how important it is? It depends on how important the Jeweled Lotus is, how important the Biblioplex is. People immediately grabbed onto the Jeweled Lotus, but I think the Biblioplex is even more important than the Jeweled Lotus, and that seemed to have gone ignored. So I think that it's possible people will immediately identify how good this is. I mean, people really need land fixing, mana fixing, and really need dual lands, so it's hard to imagine that it'll go unnoticed like the Biblioplex. And as for whether Wizards will print it, I'm fairly certain they will. Now, I'm not an expert on, you know, the history of the reserve list and reprints and that sort of thing. So I'm sure someone else that's watching this may know more about this than me. Correct me in the comments. But I can't see how this land isn't eventually coming. Maybe it's not coming in Brothers War. Probably it is not coming in Brothers War. But at some point in the future, maybe before they start printing reserve list cards, because as some, you know, MTG investors or historians might say, they'll start reprinting reserve list cards when the game starts failing and they're bleeding cash and their Wizards is about to fail, and then reserve list will be printed. So maybe this land gets printed slightly before that, but I'm not sure. I think I don't want to go out there and say it's going to come within the next year, next 2 years, next 3 years, but maybe an anniversary set. I mean, we're already doing Dominarian. This is kind of like an anniversary set, and Brothers War and that kind of stuff. Maybe in another Commander Legends, because the recent, you know, Baldur's Gate Commander Legends kind of failed, so maybe to push it over the top, because we have the Jeweled Lotus in the original Commander Legends. I don't know. What do you think about this land? And does it excite you? And do you believe me that it's coming? Or am I an idiot? Let me know.